we had started with the first topic on economics, which is upon the national income and the calculation of the national income. Then we went ahead with the second class where we finished all the methods and the measures and concepts, and we went ahead even up to the disposable personal income, per capita income. We learned several things, including the incremental capital output ratio and about the GDP deflator we had mentioned, and we had stopped the class up to there. I hope we recall whatever we have said so far. Maybe I should remove my mask. Okay. I got so used to being in Chennai with walking around with a mask. I'm sorry about it. I didn't realize. So we were covering several concepts, measures, and methods related to the GDP and other things. So now we are towards the end of that particular topic, and we need to see 2-3 specific things which are required for the mains answer writing. So far whatever we have studied, we have studied them as the concepts, and now what we could do actually is, if we have studied about GDP, the methods, measures, and all those things, issues in measuring concepts, green GDP, we have studied several things. For the mains related answer writing, we have to see 3 major areas in this particular topic on the national income accounting. So what are those 3 things? The first thing is called as studying the structural composition of GDP. So the first topic what we want to mention from what we have already learned on the concept of GDP is called the structural composition of GDP. So what do you mean by this word structural composition, right? So far we have studied 3 methods: income method, expenditure method, and product method. The answer for this topic, we are going to pick it up from the product method. So if you recall back what is a product method, first thing you would have divided the economy into primary, secondary, and tertiary. And we had a template for these 3 different sectors, and we said like whatever we are producing in the 3 different sectors, we are going to multiply it with the price and then give the final value. So that's how we have studied about the product method. This method is going to become the basis for the structural composition of GDP, where we are going to say how India's GDP over a period of time. What do you mean by over a period of time? We can talk since from independence. That's one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it is, there is a very specific year in economics which we all have to remember. Probably in future they will be also quoting about 2020 as a COVID year, and they will say pre-COVID, post-COVID, and several things. But as of now, if you look at the policies, or if you look like this, a major economic crisis which happened in India was in the year 1991. We are going to talk a lot about this economic crisis again when we are going into the external sector. But as of now, if you want to say what was the major word which was linked with this year 1991, we can mention the word balance of payment crisis. So what do you mean by this word balance of payment? Just keep it in a very simpler meaning. We had large amount of imports, but we had less of exports. So this resulted in an imbalance. Imbalance of what? Import means, you know, it is a spending. We have to give money to others. Export means what? The things which we are exporting and we are getting money from others. So the foreign money what we got was very less, but we had to pay a lot of dollars to others. So in this situation, when the payment was very heavy when compared to the receipts what we received in terms of the dollars or in terms of the foreign currency, we can call this situation as a balance of payment crisis. Today I'm just mentioning this because later only we'll be able to discuss everything, including the definition of balance of payment in the last topic on external sector. Right now we are mentioning this for a significant reason. What is the reason? This year 1991 had a balance of payment crisis, and in that particular year India did lots of policy changes, economic policy changes, including the keywords what you all would be learning from different aspects: liberalization, globalization, privatization. All of those economic major policies started coming in from the year 1991. So if you learn economics, we always have a tradition of talking economics in terms of pre-1991 and post-1991, right? So now we come back to the topic. We are going to study the structural composition of GDP, which is required to be mentioned over a period of time. The process of the GDP's growth, that is what we are going to talk as a structural composition. And how do you want to structure that process? You have to work within this framework. So how do we do this? We will say it in a very simple word. Every country will have three different major sectors across the world: the primary sector, the secondary sector, the tertiary sector, like this. And over a period of time, if you look at every country, how they should be growing, usually they should be doing very well in the primary sector, which is the agricultural sector. You know, the subsistence sector, right? Agriculture, quarrying, mining, fishery, forestry, all those basic subsistence things. Once they are doing very well in the agricultural sector or the primary sector, that's when they slowly move on to the secondary sector. And we've already defined the secondary sector as the industrial sector or the manufacturing sector. So once we are doing a very good peaking or a very good production in the industrial thing, then slowly the country moves towards the third sector, which is called as the tertiary sector. So we've already mentioned what is there in the tertiary sector, which is about your service sector. We had given a n number of industries or n number of service sectors which are there within the tertiary sector, including your tourism, telecommunication, hospitality, transportation services. So varieties of things: financial services, IT services, business services, everything we have mentioned within the tertiary sector. So how this structural composition of GDP is expected to be understood is, we are trying to take India's GDP, take 60 to 70 years of the process of growth of this GDP. When I look at the process of growth of this GDP, I look at it in terms of the three different sectors' performance. So I will be keeping on mentioning, initially India was dominated with the primary sector, and now I will say that the India is dominated with tertiary sector. So how did we move in this path of becoming primary, getting finally dominated with the tertiary, right? Right now we mentioned a situation where we said that any country which is undergoing a process of growth, it will have to follow a normal course of process of growth. What do you mean by the word normal here? When I am very good in primary, I move to secondary. When I am very good in secondary, I move to tertiary. This is the normal process of growth. Now we will look at India and ask India, you have done very good in all, all the three sectors have grown to certain extent or in a good extent in all the 50 to 70 years. But tell me your process of growth. So what is India going to tell us? India will say that, of course, I had a primary sector, but from the primary sector, the movement to the industrial sector did not happen when we were doing very well in the primary sector. What is the meaning of it? First, we will write one data. What is the data? If I say 100 rupees is the GDP of the country right now, how much do you think will be there for primary, secondary, tertiary as of now, 2020 or 2019? If you have any answers, you can type in. Arvind, அது என்ன number சொல்றாங்களோ, you just tell me. Primary sector, secondary sector, tertiary sector. If I add all the three things, you have to add it into 100. That's what I'm asking. I think I'm very clear in the question. I have 100 rupees as GDP in my hand for the country. I have divided the country into primary sector, secondary sector and tertiary sector. I am asking how much is the primary sector contributing to this 100 rupees, how much the secondary sector is contributing, how much the tertiary sector is contributing. Right? Any numbers? 20, 30 and 40, 50. Right? So this is actually slightly on a lower side. We have somewhere between 15 to 18%. This is also slightly on a lower side. It is somewhere between 25 to 30%. You can say around 38%. This is like compensating those two things. It is bit on a higher side. Sometimes it is going even up to 56% or up to 60%. So this is the current story of the GDP's structural composition for India, where we can say it is 18%, 28 to 30%, and this is somewhere 56 to 60%. So this is what we want to say for the primary, secondary and the tertiary sector. I am going to show you the numbers from the economic survey of this year. Volume 2, this first chapter will be having all the details. I will show you the PDF of the economic survey, which is the authentic source of data from the government. So we are starting with the question, what is the structural composition? It is about understanding the growth process of the GDP over a period of time. So we can pick it up from the time of independence, and we can also give a major change in the year 1991. And we have just now mentioned what is the current status of the structural composition of GDP, which is in terms of the three different sectors, and we have said like India is now dominated with the service sector. So now if you want to talk it from the independence, from the like 60-70 years, India was dominated with the primary sector. Slowly there was a certain amount of better representation of the secondary sector, and the tertiary sector was somewhere like around 20 to 30% only in the beginnings, like if you want to analyze it over a period of time. Then how did this tertiary sector became dominated so much? Is the story like the bigger thing become the second one as the bigger thing and then the third thing? That's not the story how India has gone. We will say that India was dominated by the primary sector, but it was having too much of population depending upon it, and we are going to say a particular feature for the primary sector where we are going to call it as disguised unemployment. The meaning of that is like maybe like 50 to 60% or even 75% of the population at one point of time it was depending upon the agriculture, but the amount of output what they were giving was only lesser when compared to the number of people who were employed into it. So in which case, if you look at the primary sector, we are still in the same stage. We can still say that there are too much of population who is dependent upon the primary sector, but the output of the primary sector is still less only when compared to the required rate of output. So this condition we are going to call it as disguised unemployment. We have not peaked in the agriculture sector and then the people moved from the primary to secondary. So there was a lacuna. There is a lacuna still in the case of this primary sector where we are not able to excel and then move on to the secondary sector. So whatever said and done, from the primary sector, there was a movement towards the secondary sector, and then now we have to ask ourselves, India, did you excel very well in the secondary sector and peak in the secondary sector, and then did you move to the tertiary sector? I can see now the third sector is dominating so much. So did you do so well in the industrial sector that now you have moved towards the tertiary? That is also not the story of India, because in the secondary sector, we were not able to peak because there was a lot of requirement of the technology, the capital requirements, the funds requirement, the infrastructure requirement, for which and all India was not like doing so excellent that we are able to peak in the industrial sector. Rather, we want to mention a key feature of the secondary sector, which we want to call it as premature deindustrialization. Right? Of course, if you come out of the industrialization, you can again go and peak in the service sector, but it was not a proper way of moving from the industrialization towards the service sector. That's why we are going to call it as premature deindustrialization. Why did this happen? Because we did not have enough of capital, technology, financial support, infrastructure, right, with the HR service. So the skill and the research and development, all the things which are required for the promotion of the industrial development, it was not available to the fullest level. So India could not peak in the industrialization, rather it did de-industrialization, and slowly we started moving towards the service sector. So when you want to mention what is slowly the movement towards the service sector, the movement towards the service sector, the tertiary sector started very fastly catching up after the year 1991, right? So there were lots of opening up of the sectors, there were lots of liberalization, and with that, towards the end of 1990s, we started having also the services of the computers into the banks and everywhere, including teaching, and everywhere we started making use of the computers. So once the IT sector started coming into the picture, service sector slowly started dominating, and finally we can see that today India is dominating so much with the services sector output. But still there is a problem with the services sector. We can say like 56% or 60% of the GDP coming out of the services sector. It is not producing enough jobs, right? What do we mean producing enough jobs, right? For this, let us write a number so that we understand what we are talking. So what we are saying is primary, secondary, tertiary. 18% of the GDP, 25 to 30% of the GDP, 50 to 60% of the GDP. So this we want to call as a structural composition. For the primary sector, we said the major feature which is still in trouble or troubling India is disguised unemployment. For the secondary sector, we mentioned that premature deindustrialization as the major problem. For the tertiary sector, we are saying like 50 to 60% of the GDP is happening, but still it is seen as jobless growth because it doesn't offer that much of jobs. So all of these things, we can combine this with another data which is called as occupational structure. What do you mean by occupational structure? If you say 100 rupees of GDP has been divided in this kind of a percentage across the three sectors, now you can take 100 number of people who are employed in India and ask what is the composition across the three different sectors. Again, you will see like in agriculture, you can say 49% to 50% of population is dependent. In industrial sector, you can see 25% of the population or 25 to 28% of the population employed. Here you can see only again around 25% of the population employed. So this part where you are talking about the employment, you can say that as occupational structure. What is this occupational structure? Still 50% of the population is depending upon the primary sector, but the output is coming only like around 15% to 18%. This is why we called it as disguised unemployment. There is a heavy dependence of the population on the sector, but the output is lesser. So we want to call it as disguised unemployment. In the secondary sector, though we said that there is a problem of premature deindustrialization and we have not peaked in the industrialization, there is one good feature which you can see, like the employment level or the employment generation in the secondary sector is at a good level, right? Though it is giving only 28% of the GDP, it is equally employing like 28 people in the society. So you can see one good feature in the industry or in the secondary sector. But when you come to the tertiary sector, again you can see 50 to 60% of the GDP is coming from the tertiary sector, but the level of employment is only half of it. So this sector also has a problem. This sector also has a problem. This sector has a problem, but at least to a certain extent this is fine because it is performing up to the level of the employment as well as the output. So these are the two keywords which we will look in economics. Employment, output. So India has a very complex story to tell to the rest of the world, that it did not peak in the primary sector, it did not peak in the secondary sector, but it has started peaking in the tertiary sector. Though it is peaking in the tertiary sector, it is still not helping to generate the growth, this growth of the jobs. So every sector has a different dynamics when compared to the rest of the world, because if you just look at the world, and if there are like around 200 countries if you want to mention in the world, and then them about their own process of the growth, every country will have a process of growth to explain, saying I did well in primary, so got into tertiary, secondary, and then got into tertiary. But for us, for India alone, we have to say that though we did not do so very well in primary and secondary, we have peaked in the tertiary, but even there we are not able to generate enough jobs. So India has a very different story to tell to the rest of the world. And if you see that, if you take all the 200 countries and put up the structural composition and then look at it, any country which is having 50 to 60% of the GDP coming from the tertiary sector, you will want to call that country as a developed country, because that's a feature of the developed country, right? But if you go and see the population where it is employed, still 50% of the population is with the primary sector. So India's output and employment doesn't match, and we are in a confusion. What is the confusion? 50% of the population is there in agriculture, only 25% of the population is in the tertiary sector, but that is what is dominating, and we look like we are a developed country, but we are not a developed country because still 50% of the population is lying with the primary sector. So these are the numbers, these are the nexus which we need to understand if we have to write the process of growth of GDP. India had primarily agriculture and the industrial sector only till up to 1991. After 1991 only, the service sector started becoming a significant thing. After 2000s only, service sector started dominating. Though the process of the growth has not been like peaking in agriculture, peaking in secondary sector, we have peaked in the tertiary sector. Fine, though this has happened, whether our employment has also changed in a similar way, we don't see the employment levels changing in a similar way. Our numbers on employment, which is called as the occupational structure, is still slowly only improving. So keeping in mind all of these points, we need to write the question, the answer for the question, what is the structural composition of GDP, or you tell about the process of growth of GDP over a 50 to 70 years period of time, right? And one more thing which you can actually add up with this occupational structure is, pick up this tertiary sector and give some reasons to why the tertiary sector is dominating India so much, right? Now you are seeing 60% of the GDP is coming from the tertiary sector. So you can answer questions like, why is India so much tertiarized? What do you mean by so much tertiarized? Why is India dominated so much by the tertiary sector? You have to give at least 7 to 8 reasons, right? Why do you all think that India is dominated by the tertiary sector? Now you have to say, this is the third question which will be asked upon the GDP. The second one is upon the occupational structure. I told you about 3 questions. One is structural composition. Combined with that, you have learned something on occupational structure, about the employment. Number 3 is about tertiary sector's domination. So if you have reasons to tell me, you can tell me now through the messages. Why do you think India is having a dominant tertiary sector? Say some reasons. Better wages. Okay, what else? Competitive with global economy. What else? English knowledge. Okay. India is becoming very good in English knowledge. So India has started dominating in tertiary sector. That's all. Globalization, okay. Liberalization, privatization. That's what we said about the 1991 year. More FDI is coming. Foreign investments are happening in the tertiary sector. IT boom, yes, of course. Towards the end of 1990s, we had the introduction of the computers. So we had the IT boom. Cheap labor, better wages. Yes. What else? Okay. Cheap labor, skilled labor. More human resources. If you're saying all of these things, no, it should actually reflect in the second point, occupational structure. We can say only 25% of the population is still engaged with the tertiary sector. Right? It is highly skilled, but the number of people who are involved into it is actually less. So that we have to remember. Anyways, you can give more reasons why tertiary sector is dominating in India. Is it only because of the IT boom service sector is prospering? Don't we see any other sectors inside the service sector which are doing very good? Urbanization is definitely a reason. When urbanization happens, more people will be there in a particular region, so their demand will be higher. Right? Anything else? Transportation improved. So this also resulted in demanding more. People's income was slowly improving, so their demand for all these luxury goods started increasing. Tourism was happening, so people started visiting several countries and they started learning about the better quality. This is all impact of your globalization also, right? So you travel to different countries, you come back, you start asking for a better quality services in India also. And yet another major thing which we still have to mention, why service sector is so much dominating today, is due to also telecommunication sector. It's not only because of the IT sector, telecom sector has also, it's now the largest sector in the service sector, which is attracting the FDI and other things, and which is also dominating in terms of the total contribution towards the service sector. So you can say like telecommunication also actually contributed a lot. Anything else, Arvind? Educational level improved. Okay. Better policies of the government also helped people to become accessible to many of the services. In fact, if you look about the telecom, it was first which the government started offering as MTNL, BSNL. Then only the private sector started entering into the telecommunication services. Government itself started offering several of the services to improve the quality of life. Bank loans, financial system was also helping the tertiary sector. So banking system was supporting. When you say IT boom, you can add one more thing. We were good in exporting the services, right? Particularly the IT services. So when exports started earning more foreign dollars, Indian government was very keen in promoting the exports of the IT sector. So it started giving them lots of privileges in terms of promoting the exports. So that also was becoming one of the reasons why the service sector started improving very fastly in the late 1990s or in the beginning of the 2000s. Right, so all of these reasons you will have to summarize and then keep it ready to answer the question, why is India so much tertiarized? So why is India getting dominated with the service sector or the tertiary sector is yet another standard question. So these are the three things which they keep asking in the mains examination. One, they will ask you about the process of growth in India. So for that you need to have a very good understanding about primary, secondary, tertiary, what were the issues with it, how did India move on from one to the another sector. The second thing is about the occupational structure, which they will always ask about an employment situation and how do we improve it, how do we generate more employments in the future and other things. So in that case, first of all, you should know how the occupational structure is there right now in the country so that you will be able to make more suggestions. And when you talk about the occupational structure, always remember to mention about the secondary sector. As we have already seen from the data, it is the sector which is capable of doing very good generation of jobs, right? It is called as labor intensive sector. The secondary sector is called as labor intensive sector. And when you look at the tertiary sector, we have mentioned the good about it, which is about the domination, but the issue about it, which is about the jobless growth, right? So, and we have also given the reasons why the tertiary sector has grown very fastly in India in the recent past, right? So these are the three questions which we wanted to talk from the mains aspect and to write about it. I'll show you like three tables right now from the economic survey about the GDP. There are a lot more things in that particular table for you to understand. But that as we go ahead with the chapters, once we are done with the inflation and other things, I will tell you what is called as GVA. So far in the first class or in the first topic, we have studied only about something called as gross domestic product, net domestic product, gross national product, net national product. So these are the words which you would have gotten familiarized by now, and you would have studied something called as the market prices and the factor cost. Beyond this, there are things for us to learn in the same subject. One keyword which you need to know is called as gross value added, GVA. The other two prices what you need to know is current prices and the constant prices. So I think I have already reserved the topic on GDP deflator. So all of these set of topics will be taught to you once our inflation topic discussion is over. Then we will tell you, bring you back to the first class where we will be telling you about the gross value added, current prices, constant prices, real GDP, GDP deflator. They are all like linked things which I'll tell you once that is over. So right now I'm going to show you three tables from the economic survey, volume 2, chapter 1. You can also get it downloaded from the website. It's freely available, like from the Google. If you go, you'll be able to see it. And just look at three things. One, GDP according to the expenditure method, GDP according to the product method, and the overall numbers. So these three things we will see. With that we will like wind up the first chapter for now, and we will move ahead to the second chapter. We are going to study today about economic growth and development. We are going to give a comparison of what is the meaning of the word growth, what is the meaning of the word development, and then we are going to see several indicators related to it. So that will be the second topic for today's class. So first I will show you the table which is there from the economic survey. Then we will proceed towards the second topic what we want to learn for today. Arvind, இந்த ஸ்க்ரீனை ஷேர் பண்ண முடியுமா? ஷேர் ஆகாதா? பண்ண முடியல. நான் போடுறதா உங்களுக்கு எப்படி ஜூம் பண்ணி தான் காமிக்கணும்ல? ஸ்க்ரீன் தெரியும். Okay, so this is one of the tables which I wanted to tell you to observe. Is the screen visible to all of you? Are you able to see the numbers? Visibility irka? People, I hope you are able to see the numbers. I'll share this PDF once the class is over. So what we are trying to say here is, just now we discussed something on the sectoral, the structural composition with the sectoral split up of GDP. If you are seeing the title in this table as GVA, just assume that this title is GDP. I'll tell you what is GVA. It comes from GDP only. So we will talk about it later. If you see, they have given for several periods what is the sectoral shares. It is not growth rate, it is sectoral share. What do you mean by the word share? I told you, like, you have to assume India's number as 100, and then you have to see how much is it coming from the different sectors. And we had numbers 18%, 28% and other things. Now you can see that the actual numbers which a survey presents. If you look at H1, it will be like half yearly one. Like if you are taking the financial year between the period April 1st to March 31st, up to September 30th, it will be H1. So maybe you just even leave the last column. You look at this 2018-19 for you to understand. 16% comes from the primary sector, right? Industry, manufacturing, all these things will be the secondary sector. So the secondary sector is 29% or 30%. Services will be the tertiary sector, which will be contributing 54% of GDP. It is even still higher. It was lesser in the previous years. So anyways, it is fluctuating, but you can see that the range is somewhere between 15 to 20%, 25 to 30%. Rarely it is highly above 32%. This is somewhere between 50 to 60%. So this is one thing which we have to remember as a data for writing the mains, as well as for having the gross idea about which is the sector which is dominating India in terms of, as of now, you can replace this word in your mind as GDP in terms of percentage. So if you say India is earning 100 rupees, this is what is the split up across the 3 different sectors, right? So that's one thing which we wanted to learn from this table. There are 2 more things which we have to learn. In the services, they are giving again the split up of what are the different services and all. I'll tell you 2 more tables. I hope we remember these concepts when we had learned the expenditure method. So the demand side is here taken as the expenditure method of calculating national income. If you all remember back the formula what we studied, it was C plus I plus G plus X minus M, right? You can see here C is the private consumption, gross fixed capital formation is the I, government consumption is taken, or the government expenditure is taken here as G, and this will be the exports, this will be the imports. And you can see that it is said as percentage of GDP. You know the meaning of the word is gross domestic product, and you can see in this domestic product you are actually discussing about export and the imports. And you also know how to make this domestic international. If it is written as G and P, then this table should also talk about R minus P. Otherwise, even when we are talking about gross domestic product, we are actually talking about exports and the imports, right? So they have, I'll tell you about this revised estimates and other things. As of now, just look it at as percentage of GDP. You can see that the for even for the latest year or for 2018-19, you can see that the imports are higher than exports, so it is actually becoming negative. And you have the other components C, I and G, right? So when you add all these things, it should add up to 100. Which are the four things which you will add? C plus I plus G plus X minus. So if you add these four components, it should add up to 100. And as we discussed in the class, if you notice here, India is dominated by the private consumption. So that is why we are calling India as consumption driven economy. Right? So it goes even up to 60%. The second thing is about the investment. Government's expenditure is actually lesser. And when you talk about this gross fixed capital formation, I want to tell you a bit more about this. I'll tell you in the next table when I talk about the total picture. As of now, I hope you are able to relate this particular table to the method whatever we have studied. Why is it called as demand side? Because it is on the spending side. So I demand the money for spending on the different things. So which is why I have named the table as demand side. Components as the percentage of GDP. So one is, we have shown you the sectoral share. The sectoral share of the GDP, the previous table what we showed to you, can also be taken as a product method. Right? So you know the product method only divides the economy into the primary, secondary and the tertiary sector. So that can be taken as a product method. This can be taken as the expenditure method. Right? So these are the two tables, important tables which you may have to look at when you look at the economic survey. Now I'll tell you the last table which we have to look at from the survey. These are all growth rates. Growth rate I'll discuss once inflation is over. Yeah. Actually, when we pick up the economic survey, if you see this table, this will be the table which you will be result வந்துருச்சா கிளாஸ் இதோட மட்டும் முடிச்சுட்டு வந்துடுறேன். பார்த்தாச்சா இனிமேல் நான் பார்க்கணுமா? ஓகே. Students, the UPSC final results have come. So I need to go and look at the results. So once I finish telling you about this table, I'll wind up the class for today because it's like a big day for the academy. We have worked for almost 1.5 years this time to see this final results. So I'll tell you about this particular table and I want to go and look at the results and then get back, right? So this is the third table which we want to look at the economic survey. Many of these data we are yet to learn because I haven't still told you what is current and the constant prices and all. So one is about the GDP at the current market prices. I think we are very familiar with this word. So we can see all of these things are written in lakhs and crores. But whether it is GDP at current prices or constant prices, whatever it is, these data will not come in the newspaper. What you will be seeing in the newspaper is mainly this growth rate. So this is what is reported in everyday's news, most of the news, right? How much India's GDP is growing by. If you look at the growth rate, it will be either 5% or you can take it for the GVA. I will tell you what is GVA. It is reserved for after inflation class. So as of now, you can just look at this table as GDP and its growth rate. This is one important data which you may have to look at from this particular table. The other thing is the data which you have to look at is savings. This is S. Gross capital formation is I. Right? So if you remember the circular flow in which we studied, we wanted this savings to become equivalent to investment. Now let us come and see. It is almost equal, but there is certain differences in every year. almost equivalent, S is equivalent to I, but there are some differences, maybe also because of the foreign investments, which we will talk about when we get into the external sector. But as of now, we are seeing that the table is to be read in a particular way. We know the first line definitely, we leave this word current. We know this word GDP at market prices. It is coming in some lakhs and crores of money, but we are not concentrating on the data as such. What we are concentrating is on the growth rate, right? So this is what we see in the newspaper. What is India's GDP's growth rate? 5%, 4%, 6%, 7%. This is what they report. The other data what we can understand from this table is what is the level of savings in India? It is 30% of the GDP. What is the level of investment in India? Again, it is like around 30% of the GDP. So the savings becoming equivalent to investment is also trying to be maintained. And you have to look at this word per capita income. If you all remember, we wrote per capita income as net national income or NNP divided by the population of the country. Again, if you remember, it is to be written as sigma x by n. So we said that it is an average formula. So you can see that the per capita income of the country is slowly improving, and in the latest year you can see it is a 1,35,050. You don't have to remember this number exactly, but this is essential for policy making later when we get into the next subject, which is on the fiscal policy. So please remember at least roughly that India is somewhere having 1.35 or 1.25 lakhs of rupees as the per capita income, which will be required to be used in the subsequent class. So these are some of the data which you can remember out of this particular table. The production and the rest of the table we can study as we go with the rest of the classes. So one is the growth rate, the second one is the savings, the third one is the investment, the fourth one is the per capita income. So these are the four data which you can observe from this table. They are all the macroeconomic numbers, and it is about talking about the total growth process in the country, and India's growth was seeming to be growing by 5% till up to the last year. But there is a lot of difference which we are going to see in the next economic survey because of the current COVID situation. We can see that the numbers are actually falling down to a greater extent. Right? So with this, the first topic on national income we are almost completing. We have said the basics, the fundamentals and the concepts. We have discussed three topics upon the mains answer writing for the national income as a topic. And third thing is we have mentioned about the data from the economic survey, which is from the latest year, about the product method, about the expenditure method, and we have also mentioned which are the major data which you have to observe from this particular table. So this PDF we are going to share to you now after the class, and you can have a look at the data from the table. I'll continue with the second topic which we had actually planned for today's class, which is on economic growth and development, in the next class, which we will be scheduling very soon because I couldn't complete it today. And because of the announcement of the results, I am stopping the class here. Thank you.